Hello, this is Terry with Fortres Grand Corporation, and today we're going to talk about Fortres 101.7, Effective Desktop Protection for Windows. Today we'll look at the Fortres 101.7 features, how Fortres 101 works, as well as getting started with Fortres 101, which includes how to download Fortres 101 from our website, install it, and begin configuring the security parameters inside of the Fortres security interface. Fortres 101.7 includes many new features. Some of those are Windows 8 support, kiosk mode support, and improved internet filtering. With Windows 8 support, the start screen is now something that can be restricted and controlled through Fortres 101. You can prevent users from accessing the charms bar or individual charms on the charms bar. You can also prevent access to the application bar and the tile layout. So if you don't want users to be able to rearrange the tiles on the Windows 8 start screen, you can do that with Fortres 101.7. With kiosk mode, Fortres 101.7 allows you to launch a single program or website at login and then have that be the only program that the user is able to interact with while they're logged into the machine. Along with kiosk mode, you can block keystrokes, so if you're going to a website and you don't want users to be able to use Internet Explorer shortcuts to organize favorites or do other things, you can restrict that in kiosk mode. And you can also use kiosk mode to configure auto logon so that as soon as the machine boots, it immediately logs in and launches the kiosk program. Internet filtering has been improved in Fortres 101.7 and does not require a separate installation. One of the nice features with the internet filtering in version 7 is that you can now have a custom redirect for a blocked site. In previous versions of Fortres 101, you just had a generic site blocked message, but now you can actually specify a URL that will be displayed when a user attempts to go to a restricted site, and you can have any information on that page that you would like. Fortres 101 is restrictive security. It allows you to lock down the desktop, the file system, the registry, websites, or keystrokes. The configuration is simple and straightforward. You can enable and disable security without rebooting, so you don't have to spend a lot of time when you're testing the security settings with logging in and logging out or rebooting the computer. You can also customize the security by user or computer, and you do this by placing users and computers into groups, which we'll take a look at. You can also use our central control product to store the settings on the network, and this is very useful so that you don't have to go around to each machine and keep making the same configuration changes. Central control allows you to connect all of the Fortres 101 computers together, and when you save the settings on one computer, they're saved to the server, and then all the other computers on the network will pick up those security settings, and you won't have to go around and make all those changes individually. The Fortres 101 security is very flexible. You can do things like make the hard drive read-only, and at the same time you can allow applications like antivirus programs or network management tools to be privileged where the security will not be applied to those programs. So in the case of an antivirus program, you can allow virus definitions to be downloaded and updates to happen to the antivirus program without Fortres 101 getting in the way, even while the hard drive is set to read-only for everything that the user does. Fortres 101 was designed to save you, the administrator, time. It basically prevents unwanted changes from happening on the computer so that you don't have to go back and undo what the users have done or repair machines that have been infected with malware or just generally been reconfigured. It allows you to restrict users from running programs from USB drives, so if you don't want a user to bring in a thumb drive and launch an application and just run any program that they might have on your machines, you can do that with Fortres 101. And all of this is to reduce support calls and allow the machines to be in a stable configuration for patrons to use. The installation for Fortres 101 is pretty straightforward. It can be run silently with command line parameters and also supports imaging. So if you're using imaging to deploy your OS images out to other machines, Fortres 101 works with that. Fortres 101.7 works with Windows 8.1, Windows 8, and Windows 7. If you happen to have Windows XP machines around, you can contact us and we can get you license and installation for Fortres 101 6.5, which does still support Windows XP. As with all of our products, we have free technical support while you're demoing the software or after you've purchased it. You can contact us either over the phone, through email, or do an online chat, and that'll connect you with a support representative, and you can ask your questions and we'll help you with any configuration issues you might run into. A little bit about how Fortress 101 works. At the top of this diagram we have applications and users, and they're typically doing things like opening and saving files, modifying the registry through an application, going to websites, or dragging icons around and interacting with the Windows shell. And essentially what Fortress 101 does is intercept all of those operations and look at your security settings and determine whether or not you want users to be able to do that. In the case of files, Fortress 101 would look at your file security settings, and if a user is trying to save a file or delete a file off the computer that they shouldn't, then Fortress 101 will return an access denied message. If it's something that you've allowed the user to do, it'll just be passed on to the file system. The same thing is true of the registry and with websites and with changes to the desktop. The nice part about Fortress 101 is that it works in conjunction with your NTFS permissions in the file system or your permissions in the registry, and if Fortress 101 allows an operation to go on, it's passed on to the operating system and the operating system processes it like it normally would. With the different areas, there are different security types. So for file access, there are 5 different types. You can have full access, meaning that Fortress 101 will not restrict access to the file. There's read-only access, which means that Fortress 101 will prevent modifications to the file or prevent the file from being deleted off of the machine, but it will allow the user to open the document, or if it's a program, they can launch the program and run the program. The no access file security type prevents any opening or deleting or renaming or changing of a file. If you make an executable no access, then if you were to try and double click on the program to run it, it won't run, and the operating system will just return a message saying that you don't have the permissions to launch the program. If this was a Word document, you wouldn't be able to open the document to view it or make any changes to it or delete it or rename it. The hidden and browsable file types allow you to actually hide files on the hard drive. I typically don't recommend using the hidden and browsable file types because it doesn't really secure the file the way full access, read-only, and no access do. It basically just hides it from the user and doesn't provide the actual security to prevent any changes to the file. But they are there, and if you want to use those, you can. Just be aware that it may result in more configuration time being spent because most applications need to browse portions of the hard drive in order to find plugins and load DLLs and things like that. With registry keys, they're either full access or read-only. With websites, it's either allowed or denied. And with desktop, it's either allowed or denied as well. So things like the system tray or the start menu or opening my computer or the recycle bin, you can either choose to allow the user to do that or restrict them from doing that. So getting started with Fortress 101, the first thing you'd want to do is download the software from our website. I'm actually going to switch over to Internet Explorer and go to our website because there are 2 different downloads that you can get from our site, and I want to explain the differences between the 2 of them. So this is our website. If I go to the downloads menu and pick Fortress 101, I am at the version 7 download page. It is right at the top, and the first download that I can choose is the version that I would want to use if I was going to install Fortress 101.7 on a machine fresh, or if I was going to upgrade from version 6.5 or an older build of version 7. So this executable, if I download it, will have a typical wizard that I click next on and go through and interactively run the setup. Now there are command line parameters that you can use and that will automate the installation. If you would like to find out more about those, contact technical support and they can help you with that. That would be useful if you were trying to script the login on a bunch of machines and wanted it to just run automatically without having to visit each machine individually. The second download on the page is the download if you are using Central Control. So if you're an existing Fortress 101 customer and you're using Central Control and you want to install a new build of version 7, or if you want to upgrade from version 6.5 to version 7, you can download the special upgrade using Central Control installation, and this is a special package that runs automatically, keeps all of the existing configuration settings, and doesn't require any user input and automatically reboots at the end of it. This is made specifically to be pushed out through our Central Control software so that you can update your existing Fortress 101 installations without having to go to those machines. Okay, now once you've got the software downloaded and installed, the next thing to do would be to configure the software, and you can do that by opening the security interface. And the way you do that is either use the Control-Shift-F hotkey, or you can double click on the tray icon. By default, Fortress 101 is going to restrict access to the tray icon, so the most common way of accessing the interface is to use the Control-Shift-F hotkey. So once I've done that, I can switch over to the security interface, which looks like this, and now I can configure the software. If you're new to Fortress 101, I'm going to go through some of the different parts of the interface and show you how things work, because it is different than a lot of other programs. The easiest place to start is with the Groups menu. When you install it by default, you'll have a single default group. On the group menu is where you would choose different groups to configure, as well as how to create groups. So what I can do is click on the Security Group Manager, and that will open my Security Group Manager. And this allows me to create groups where I can assign users or computers to those groups, and then those groups can have specific security settings. So the way I would do that is I would just click New, and I'm going to call this maybe the Staff Group. And what I do after I have my group created is I can browse and find users and groups, actual Windows users and groups, and then drag those users to the staff group, or I could drag them to the default group. If a user or a computer is not assigned to a group, then by default that user would get the default security, so I don't need to assign every single user to a group, just the ones that I don't want to have the default security. If I was using central control, instead of seeing the users that are on my local machine, I would see the users that are on my network. So if you have domain users that you want to grab, you can use central control, and that will get all of your domain users, and you can assign them to a group. I can also drag entire groups over, so I could take this administrators group and I can drag it over here, and now I have my administrators group, and it automatically grabbed the 2 users out of the administrators group and added them to the Fortress Grand group. In Fortress 101, users can only be in one group, and so that is why you drag the users from the local computer or your domain and put them into a Fortress group. The other thing that I can do is scroll to the bottom of this list, and I can find all the computers that have Fortress 101 installed on it. I'm in local mode right now, so I only have just the computer that I'm on. If I wanted to, though, I could drag this computer and put it into the staff, and now any user that logs in on this computer will get the staff security, whether they're an admin or they're a generic user. So computers have a higher precedence over users. If I remove this computer, I can just right click and choose delete, and now it's gone, and now I'll be back to logging in, and the security will be based on the username. So that's how to create groups. Once I've got my groups created, I go to the group menu, and now I have my 3 different groups that I can work with: my default group, administrators, or staff. If I want to edit the staff settings, I just click on staff, and in the lower right corner of the screen it changes to say group staff, and that's how I know what group I'm working with. For the rest of the webinar, I'm going to go through and just work with the default group. Before we get into the settings, the last thing is the central control menu, and this is where I can choose my connection settings. And if I was using a central control server, I would just choose networked, and I would put in the name of my central control server where I had already installed the central control product. After I put in the name, I would click attach, and it'll prompt me for the password to attach to that server, and then I would be connected. For the purposes of our demonstration today, we're just going to stay in local mode. So the next thing we're going to do is look at some of the different settings. There are different groups of settings in the tree on the left, and to configure those settings, I just click on them, and then that will show me the specific settings in that group on the right side. The first one we have is the Fortress 101 security, and this is basically an on-off switch for the group. So I could double click on this and choose to have security disabled, hit OK, and then when I go to my file menu and choose save, I'm able to see that the security is disabled. The next option is the apply security restrictions to administrators. By default, Fortress 101 does not apply security to administrators when they log in. We take the same approach that Microsoft does, and don't enforce any security restrictions when you log in as an administrator, because we assume that you're there to administer the machine and make changes, and you don't want Fortress 101 getting in the way. So if you have users that do need to log in with administrative privileges and you want Fortress 101 enabled, you can double click on this property and choose enabled and hit OK, and then that will allow the security to be active even if an administrator does log into the machine. The third option in here is the show status icon in the system tray, and this option just controls whether or not the tray icon is visible in the system tray. By default, there's a tray icon that is green if security is enabled and a red X if it is disabled. If you want to hide that from the user so they don't see it, you can just double click on this and choose disabled. I'm going to skip automatically configure special applications until we talk about the file and registry settings, because that's where that property comes into play. The next group of settings are the desktop settings, and I'm not going to go through all of the desktop settings, but you can see there's an extensive list. Things like the start menu or the start screen, my computer, recycle bin, system tray access, shell context menus. Shell context menus would prevent users from right-clicking on the desktop and getting a context menu while they're at the desktop. All of these things can be enabled or disabled, and the majority of them are disabled by default except for Explorer windows and shell folders, and that is so that you can have a folder on your desktop that has a bunch of shortcuts in it to programs that you may want the users to have access to, and that will still work. I should say the default configuration or the default use for Fortress 101 and how we intend for you to use it is to install the operating system, install all of your applications, and then put shortcuts on the desktop for whatever programs you want your users to have access to. At that point, you can install Fortress 101, and Fortress 101 will lock it down so that the only way they can access it and launch programs is through the desktop. They won't be able to use the start menu by default or browse around and find other ways to launch programs. Some of the other things that are in this list are things that are related to the actual Explorer windows, like shell toolbars, the breadcrumb bar, which is where you type in the folder that you want to go to in Windows Explorer. Also the navigation buttons that let you navigate forward and back inside of an Explorer window, and the shell favorites pane, which is the left side of the Explorer windows when you open those. And all of those things are disabled by default, but it's very easy to just double click and enable setting and do a file save, and then you can use that. You may have noticed in the lower right corner of the screen when I did a file save, our logo comes up briefly and then disappears, and that's a visual indicator that the settings have been updated on the machine and are now current. Okay, continuing on, we'll look at the Windows 8 settings. In Windows 8, you can use the charms bar, the application bar, the taskbar by default, but the individual charms that are on the charms bar are disabled. If I want to prevent users from having access to the charms bar at all, I can just double click and choose disabled, and that will disable the charms bar for everyone. I can also enable the charms bar and then have control over individual charms like the search charm, the share charm, the start, the device, and the settings charm. And then there's also the launcher tip window and the reject a screen options, which I can have control over as well. The bulk of the configuration of Fortress 101 is probably done inside of the file and registry settings. This is where you configure what the user can do with the file system, whether they can save to the hard drive or what programs they can run. There are several options on here. We'll go through some of them. The first one is the block execution of installed applications. If I double click on this, I'm going to get a tree that kind of represents the start menu and allows me to go through and choose different programs that I don't want the user to be able to run. So if I don't want them to be able to use, say, the Photos app, I can just check the box for Photos app, and now that exe will be prevented from being launched. The nice part is that this is done through the file system, so it doesn't matter what mechanism the user uses to try and launch the program. It's going to be blocked at the file system level, so they're not going to be able to run it, whether you allow access to the start menu or there's a shortcut on the desktop or they find some other way to try and launch the program. What we're going to do is make the Photos app exe non-accessible so that users can't have access to the file. I can also list things that are not in the start menu and make them no access as well. We have some that are in the list by default, things like the registry editor or the task manager or the policy editor. And if I want to add something new, I just click and I can put in anything. If for some reason I wanted to protect Notepad from being run, I can just add notepad.exe and hit OK, and now I won't be able to run Notepad. I'll just receive an access denied message. If I want to remove that, I can just come back in and select notepad.exe and hit the delete key, and then it's gone. In fact, I could delete all of these, and then I would have all of those programs accessible. If I've done changes like this and I want to go back to the default settings, I can just click the Restore Default button, and that puts it back to the default settings from when I installed Fortress 101. The next property are the read-only no-write files and folders, and this is where I set up files and folders that I want to be read-only, meaning that the user can open them, or in the case of a program, they can run the program, but they can't make changes to it. And by default, we have most of the executable file types in this list, things like exe, DLL, sys, which are device drivers. They're in this list because you typically don't want users to be making changes to those files. You want those files to be read-only and the user just run them. If I wanted to add new things, I can click in here. As you can see, I can use wildcards, so if for some reason I wanted all text files to be read-only, I can put in star.txt and hit enter, and now all of my text files are read-only. I can also specifically list a file. I could change the star.txt to be readme.txt, and now readme.txt files anywhere on the drive would be read-only. I can also list folders. So I could put in /users /genuser /desktop, and as long as I put a trailing backslash, Fortress 101 will know that I'm talking about the folder, and now the entire genuser desktop folder will be read-only, meaning I can't save anything to it. I can also use environment variables, and this is a handy thing inside of Fortress 101, because if I wanted everybody's desktop to be read-only, I wouldn't want to list every single user that might log into this machine. What I can do is use the environment variable %user_profile %, and that will be interpreted at runtime, and whoever logs in, it will get their desktop folder. So I can use wildcards, I can use file names, I can use specific folders, I can use environment variables. It's very flexible in how I specify the security inside of the Fortress 101 interface. And again, I can also click and browse, and this will give me a file open box where I can go and select a folder and just say put the Windows Defender folder in and select the files that way, so I don't have to necessarily type in the path myself. Okay. The next option is the no security files and folders, and this option doesn't have any default settings because by default, if the files aren't in the read-only or the no access list, then Fortress 101 is going to allow access to those files by the user. So there's no need to necessarily list anything in the no security files and folders unless I've made the drive read-only, or I have made used a wildcard to make all files of a certain type restricted, and I wanted to put a specific one in here. So maybe, for example, if I had star.txt in as read-only, meaning users couldn't save to it, I could go in here and add readme.txt, and now users would be able to save this text file even though all the other ones were restricted. So the no security files and folders isn't used a whole lot, but this is where you can remove all of the Fortress 101 security for a file or a folder or a category of files using wildcards. There's also the protected registry keys, and this allows you to add registry keys that you want to be read-only. So you can click and then use the browse button, and this will let you browse through the registry and choose any registry keys that you want to be read-only. We're going to jump over privileged application and move to read-only drives. Read-only drives are where you configure drives to be read-only so that the users cannot save to them. If I don't want anybody to save anything to the hard drive, I can just choose the All Fixed Drives option at the bottom and press OK, and now it'll tell me that the read-only drives are all fixed drives. What that means is that when a user logs in, Fortress 101 will determine what the fixed drives are on the machine and make those read-only. So if I have just one volume, maybe a C drive, that'll be read-only. If I were to have a machine that had two drives, maybe a C and a D drive, Fortress 101 will determine that and make all of the fixed drives read-only. One word of caution when you use the read-only drives and set it to fixed drives, some applications are going to need to save files to the drive in order to function properly, and this is where privileged applications come in. Privileged applications is where I configure programs that are privileged and Fortress 101 does not secure any file access for them. A typical case would be to put your antivirus program in here. And once you've listed the exe that you want to be privileged, you then click the configure button, and that will allow you to list all of the files that are going to be unprotected for that application. So if my antivirus program needed to write out a star.dat file and maybe a star.db file, I can list those files, and now antivirus.exe will be able to write any DAT file or any DB file, even though I've made the entire hard drive read-only. I can also, if I trust the application, I can put in star, and that will allow access to the entire hard drive, so I don't have to list specific files. I can just put in star, and now antivirus.exe will be able to write any file it wants to anywhere on the computer. This is great for utilities like antivirus programs or network management tools. I would not want to do this with something like Microsoft Word, where users can use the file open or file save dialog box to create and delete files. So again, privileged applications are where I make exceptions to the security. And this takes us to the special applications list that I skipped over when we were on the basic settings. The automatically configure special applications property is enabled by default, and when that is enabled, we have a list of special applications inside of Fortress 101 that contain things like Office and antivirus programs. And what happens with these special applications is that when the security settings load, we look to see if any of these programs are installed on the computer, and if they are, then we automatically insert privileged application settings so that you don't have to. So essentially, we know what needs to be accessed by Microsoft Office so that it can run when the hard drive is set to be read-only, and we automatically insert those settings for you so that you don't have to go into the privileged applications and configure them yourself. So if you have an application that is not in the special applications list, that is when you would need to use the privileged application to configure that security settings. There's also a non-executable drives option. Non-executable drives are drives where you cannot launch a program. By default, this is removable drives, and this prevents the user from bringing in a thumb drive and being able to run any random program from a thumb drive. They would still be able to open and save documents and spreadsheets and images and things like that, but they would not be able to launch a program and run it on the computer. If you want to take it a step further, you can use the next four options, which are all related to USB FireWire drives, whether it's a floppy, CD, DVD, flash, or hard drive. The most common one would be your flash drives. If I choose disabled for this property, that will prevent the device from being recognized by the system at all. So what this means is if I disable the USB FireWire flash drives and I bring a thumb drive into the computer and plug it in, it's not going to be assigned a drive letter, and Fortress 101 is going to block the mounting of that device so that it can't be used to transfer data on or off of the machine. So again, you can use these if you want to completely eliminate the ability for someone to use one of these types of USB drives on the machine. The next four options are about preventing browsing from the files on the file system. Again, I don't recommend using these four options. If you think it's something you'd like to do, contact technical support, and so they can help you with the exact way you'd want to configure those settings. And the last four options are on the file and registry settings page are file restrictions for different system threads. There's administrator threads, system threads, local service and network service threads, and by default Fortress 101 file settings will be applied to all of those threads as well. So a system thread up here will not be able to run regedit, sysedit, or setup.exe. If you want to change that behavior, you can double click on, say, the system account threads and disable it, and now Fortress 101 security will not be applied to those system account threads. And this can be very useful with network management tools where you want to allow the network management tool to make changes to the machine and push out packages without Fortress 101 getting in the way. The next group of settings are the kiosk mode settings. The message comes up that says when you're in kiosk mode, there's not a visible way to shut down the computer, so you use Control-Shift-S to shut down the machine, and then that will open a password prompt, and if you put in Fortress Security Interface password, you can actually shut the machine down. Click OK on that, and kiosk mode is disabled by default. If you want to use any of the options on this page, the first thing you would need to do is double click on kiosk mode and choose enabled. Once you've done that, you can choose the website or application that you want to launch. We have a kiosk setup page that's in here by default, but this could be any web page that you want users to go to as soon as the machine logs in. I can also configure the auto logon username, domain, or password, and then Fortress 101 will automatically log the machine in as soon as it boots. And then I also have keystroke options where I can block different keystrokes so that users aren't doing things like showing the favorites or managing kiosk windows or opening new windows. And these are all disabled by default so that basically when I log in, I go to a single website and that's the only thing I can do on that computer. So this is a very special use of Fortress 101 that probably doesn't apply to a normal public access computer. We have internet settings, and the internet settings allow you to configure URLs that you want to either block or allow. The most common use of the internet filtering is to put a list of URLs into the URLs to allow property, and maybe I could put in site1.com and maybe site2.com and site3.com, and once I've got those sites listed, then I could say allow only these URLs, and now the only sites that users would be able to access would be these three sites. If they try to go to a site that's not in this list and the allow only URLs listed is enabled, they'll receive a site blocked message. And one of the new things that you can do with version 7 is you can specify a custom forward for the block page. So if I wanted to redirect the user to a specific page that says here are the acceptable websites, and if you try to go anyplace else that's an unacceptable use of the computer, I could make a page that says that and then come in here and list the URL of that page. There are also startup and shutdown options inside of Fortress 101, and this controls what happens when the user tries to shut the machine down or access the lock screen. And I have options for shutting down, restarting, sleeping, hibernate, or lock computer, and I can disable or enable those options, and they'll actually be removed from the shutdown interface so that users can't choose that. I can also specifically say what the default shutdown option should be and choose either log off, shutdown, or restart, so that when that window comes up, I've pre-selected the option that I want them to use. I can also configure the Windows Auto Logon through the settings on this window if I want to use it outside of kiosk mode. And once again, once I've made all the changes to my configuration, I go to the File menu and choose Save, and that will save the settings and update it on the local machine. If I'm using central control, that will save the settings to the server, and then all the other machines on the network will pick up those settings. One last piece of information that's useful when you're first starting with Fortress 101 is that on the File menu there is a Disable All Security in this computer option, and this will allow you to turn the security off on just the machine that you're sitting at. It won't affect any of the other computers on the network, but it will turn the security off on this computer so that you could do management type things, install print drivers, install updates, things like that, without Fortress 101 getting in the way. If I check this option, it will let me know that security will not be enabled until I check the option again. So I click yes, and now security is disabled. To re-enable the security, I go to the File menu, and click the disable alt security on this computer option again to remove the check, and then security would be re-enabled. So that's a quick overview of Fortres 101 and the configuration interface. It's certainly not comprehensive and includes every option, but I tried to hit the key ones that most customers use and most people use when they're configuring the security. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. And if you have more information or have questions, feel free to contact us. If you're looking for technical support, you can call our toll-free number, press option 2, or email support@FortresGrand, or do an online chat through our website. If you would like to get pricing or quotes, again, call our toll-free number or email sales@FortresGrand, and we can help you with that. That's all for today. I hope you learned a lot and look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.